Now it is time for the first in a new series of Perspective on the World Today. And if you think back over the last few months here in France, you probably think the Olympics and the Paralympics have been grabbing all the headlines here. Well, they certainly quite rightly have, but there's also been another major story which is set to dominate as well in the next few weeks and months. That is the failure, according to his opponents anyway, of President Emmanuel Macron to name a new prime minister, despite the legislative elections here being 2 months ago now. The difficulty that three blocs now dominate the parliament, with all of them with relatively the same number of seats. Now, today, as Macron is receiving another few senior political figures at the Élysée Palace to try to find a way forward, as we talked with our correspondent just a short while ago. Well, we're going to dive straight into the latest then with Renaud Foucart. He's senior lecturer in Economics University Management School at the University of Lancaster. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme. Of course, the left-wing bloc in the parliament then says Macron should naturally nominate one of them to be prime minister. Macron's been rejecting that, saying their candidate would just be voted down very quickly by the two other blocs. Why does Macron, though, perhaps not just follow tradition, appoint someone from the left, and if he gets knocked down, he gets knocked down and he can start again?
So, first of all, I don't think there is a tradition for parliament with one-third, one-third, one-third. So there is a case for Macron to say this is an unprecedented situation with one-third for the left, one-third for the center, one-third for the far right. No one has clearly won. And you've seen for the election of the head of the parliament that actually the center and the right were the biggest group, larger than the left. But also I think there is, the idea that in a presidential system like France, control has to be in the hands of the president. And while a lot of people were hoping this election to be the beginning of a more parliamentarian France, Macron has shown that he wants to keep the presidential grip and that the decision is strongly in his hand, and that's the way he would interpret the French constitution.
That's making the far left and the left as well furious, though, isn't it?
They are furious, but the bet of Emmanuel Macron is to divide them and to get the left and perhaps the Social Democrats and the Green to be divided and to support someone he would nominate from closer to the center left. So the word on the street has been, on Tuesday, he might appoint Bernard Cazeneuve, so a previous prime minister from François Hollande, so from the center left, and that it would be impossible for the socialists not to support it. If you look at this, imagine the day after the election, 2/3 of the parliament is center and left. They were elected together in a Republican front against the far right. This would not be a shocking outcome to have a center-left government. What might be shocking for a lot of people is the way it happened. The fact that it's Macron alone who seemed to have completely ignored parliamentarians and political parties talking to each other and decided that, again, in a very Fifth Republic Bonapartist fashion, it was only the job of the president to choose and to decide what was sustainable or not.
Yeah, you mentioned that name, Bernard Cazeneuve. He's at the Élysée Palace right now as we talking with Emmanuel Macron. I mean, today could be the crucial day, potentially. It could be that Bernard Cazeneuve is named, if not today, perhaps tomorrow, as the new prime minister.
Yes, and I think the bet of Macron will be that nobody can, from the left, objectively say that this is somebody you need to reject at all costs. And so in a vote of no confidence, the only thing that the prime minister needs to do is to survive, not to have a majority against. So this would be very, very tight. But what is possible is that if there is a deal with the right, so with Les Républicains, to sort of abstain and not vote against because it's still better than Lucie Castet to them, and if enough of the socialists vote in favor, this could be sustainable for a very short run. But in my opinion, this is also largely kicking the can in the long grass because it doesn't really solve the problem posed by this election, which is those three blocs and the fact that they don't talk to each other and cannot build coalitions.
It's so messy, isn't it? I mean, in theory, anyway, this government, whoever it is, whatever it is, has got to survive until at least next spring, because that's the earliest that Macron can call another round of legislative elections. And even then, it's unlikely he's really going to want to do that. How on earth is France going to govern itself for the next 3 years?
Well, if Cazeneuve survives, the idea will be, as always in France, that all the political parties are now on the starting block for the only thing that matters to all the very ambitious politicians in France, which is the next presidential election. So I guess the thinking would be France at the moment would be in relatively safe governance mode, also because there is nothing very sexy at being the prime minister of France at the moment due to the difficult budget situation. So whoever will be in charge of France at the moment, it's not a lot of potential in terms of political potential to gain by leading France as a prime minister at the moment. But no, we cannot completely rule out the fact that Cazeneuve would fail. So if Cazeneuve or whoever is selected by Emmanuel Macron doesn't pass a no confidence vote, there will be the need to find another prime minister. And I think we cannot be 100% certain. It's very far from being 100% certain that whoever is chosen by Macron will survive more than a couple of weeks.
He's also meeting with other people today, isn't he? He's meeting with Xavier Bertrand from the right-wing Republicans. He's also meeting with his two predecessors, François Hollande and Nicolas Sarkozy, both former presidents as well. What's the point, if you like, do you think, of Macron talking to them?
So the point of talking to the right was that at the beginning, Macron said, I'm open to find a personality from the center-left or the center-right. And he was really teasing Les Républicains to try to see, would you be interested in having one of your guys in charge? It's not clear to me how this would have worked, because this would have meant that either a right-wing guy would have had the support from the left, which is very unlikely, or some sort of abstention from the far right. But still, he wanted to keep open the two possibilities. And I think now, what he would do if he's talking to Bernard Cazeneuve is having a very, very tight bargaining about what a prime minister from the center-left would be allowed to do, including on changing the pension reform, of higher salaries for the public sector, etc. And so keeping bargaining cheap for Macron and saying, if you don't take the job, I might give it to the right, might be a way for him to keep enough leverage on the left in the negotiations.
You mentioned the pension reform. I mean, if anything, that's been the major topic, if you like, French politics-wise over the last couple of years. A lot of candidates now in that legislature here in France want that pension reform completely scrapped. It's still very much in danger, isn't it?
It is, in theory, very much in danger, because if there is a vote in the parliament, so many parties, including the far right, are committed to scrap it that it might pass. But the problem is that whoever is the prime minister will be in charge of the budget. And this is something that is financed at the moment, the pensions, due to this extension of the age of retirement. So if you have to scrap the pension reform now, you also need to find a lot of money. So what would be doable is that if someone from the center-left is prime minister, he could offer to reform the pension reform and say move towards a point system, for instance, like Macron suggested in 2017. So something with a bit more social justice in it. But the basic point of, intergenerational justice, who's going to pay right now? Do you really want to have fewer and fewer young people pay for more and more older people for pension? This is an open question, and everyone was against the pension reform in the opposition, but being against it and just scraping it and saying we go back to 62 or even 60-year-old one in government, this means giving up a lot of money for other spending, redistribution, environmental goal, etc. A lot of things that the left think to care about, hopefully a bit more than simply the pension age.
Just time to ask you all about the far right. We should mention them. And of course, in the first round of the legislative elections, they did exceptionally well, a bit less well in the second round because of that, traditional situation where a lot of people vote in order to keep the far right out. Have they sort of been a bit forgotten in all of this, though? I mean, they did still get that third of the legislative seats.
Yes, and I think it's part of the strategy of the far right to be forgotten in between the elections. That's always a strategy of Marine Le Pen to go in submarine mode in between elections, because then you just have to appear in a few strategic moments and people are not questioning too much the practicalities of what you suggest. One of the reasons the far right lose in the second round is indeed the tradition against the far right, preserving democracy. But another reason is that in between the two rounds, be it Marine Le Pen for the presidential election, but also here, all the candidates for parliament, between the two rounds, they have to go to debates. They have to talk and they have to be faced with their contradiction. And whenever there is a tight scrutiny on the far right, they do very badly, because of course, a lot of the populist ideas do not survive a bit of inquiry. And so I think they will try to hide now, just to complain about the lack of democracy and try to make a big comeback in, again, what is the main goal of most ambitious French politicians, the next presidential election.
Good to talk to you as ever here on France 24. Thanks very much for joining us. Renaud Foucart, Senior Lecturer in Economics at the University of Lancaster. Thanks very much once again.